The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the dusty trading post, and Zelda Edwards pressed her trembling hands against her threadbare skirt, trying desperately to make them still, as she peered through the cracked window at the desolate landscape of Montana Territory stretching endlessly in every direction. It was August of 1876, and the small town of Dillon sat isolated among the rolling hills and distant mountains, a collection of weather-beaten buildings that looked fragile against the vast wilderness. Zelda had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Philadelphia, answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride placed by a rancher named Luther Foster. The letters they had exchanged over the past 4 months had been polite, practical, discussing expectations and arrangements with the kind of formality that kept fear at bay. But now, stepping down from the stagecoach with legs that barely held her weight, that fear came rushing back with overwhelming force. Her hands shook as she accepted her single worn carpetbag from the driver. Her whole body trembled, and she could not make it stop no matter how she willed herself to be calm. The other passengers dispersed quickly, eager to escape the heat and dust, but Zelda stood frozen on the wooden sidewalk, her breath coming in short gasps that made her corset feel even tighter than usual. She was 22 years old and had never ventured farther than 10 miles from the Philadelphia boarding house where she had worked as a seamstress until the proprietor died and his son sold the property. With no family and few prospects, the advertisement had seemed like providence. Luther Foster sought a capable woman willing to work hard on a cattle ranch, someone who understood that frontier life required strength and resourcefulness. She had presented herself as exactly that kind of woman, perhaps exaggerating her courage just slightly in her carefully penned letters. Now, watching the stagecoach pull away in a cloud of dust, Zelda felt anything but strong. The town seemed filled with hard-eyed men who looked at her with open curiosity. The buildings were unpainted wood, some listing slightly to one side. The smell of livestock and sun-baked earth filled her nostrils. This was nothing like the cobblestone streets and brick buildings of Philadelphia, nothing like the life she had known for all her years. A man emerged from the general store across the street, and Zelda's heart lurched. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that touched his collar and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore canvas pants, a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a hat that had seen better days. His boots kicked up small puffs of dust as he crossed the street toward her, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone completely at ease in this harsh landscape. "Miss Edwards." His voice was deep and quiet, carrying easily in the stillness. Zelda tried to answer, but her throat had closed. She managed a jerky nod and, to her horror, felt her whole body shaking harder. Her hands trembled so violently that she nearly dropped her carpetbag. The shaking spread through her arms, her shoulders, making her teeth chatter despite the oppressive heat. Luther Foster stopped a few feet away, his gray eyes taking in her condition with what seemed like calm assessment rather than judgment. He did not speak immediately, did not rush to fill the silence with empty reassurances or demands that she compose herself. Instead, he simply stood there, solid and still, as though he had all the time in the world. "You have had a long journey," he said finally. His voice remained quiet, almost gentle. "It is natural to feel uncertain." The kindness in his tone nearly undid her completely. Zelda felt hot tears prick her eyes, which only added to her humiliation. She was supposed to be capable and strong, not falling apart on a public street before even exchanging proper greetings with her intended husband. "I am sorry," she managed to whisper, the words coming out broken and breathless. "I cannot seem to stop. Luther took a step closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "May I carry your bag?" She nodded again, unable to trust her voice. He took the carpet bag from her shaking hands, then stood beside her, not touching but near enough that she could feel his presence like a windbreak against a storm. "My wagon is just there," he said, gesturing to a sturdy vehicle hitched to two patient horses. "We will sit for a moment before we go. There is no hurry." He guided her to the wagon with small gestures and quiet words, never reaching for her or trying to rush her along. When they reached it, he set down her bag and turned to face her fully. Zelda was still shaking, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps that made her dizzy. She felt as though she might fly apart completely, as though the fear that had been building throughout the endless journey had finally broken through every defense she had tried to construct. "Miss Edwards," Luther said, his voice still that same steady quiet. "Zelda, if I may, you are safe here." She shook her head frantically. Nothing felt safe. Everything was strange and foreign and overwhelming. The sky was too big, the land too empty, the future too uncertain. "I know it does not feel that way right now," he continued, "but I give you my word. You are safe with me and you are safe in Dillon. Nobody will harm you here." "I am not what you expected," she gasped out. "I am not brave or strong. I should not have come. I have made a terrible mistake." "You traveled 2,000 miles alone to start a new life," Luther said. "That is the definition of bravery. What you are feeling right now, that is not weakness. That is your body finally letting go of all the fear you have been holding on to just to make the journey possible." His words cut through the panic, just enough for her to draw a slightly deeper breath. She looked up at his face, seeing no disappointment or frustration there, only patience and something that might have been understanding. "I wrote such confident letters," she whispered. "I made myself sound like someone who could handle anything." "We all present our best selves in letters," Luther said. "I did the same. I made ranch life sound more comfortable than it is. I made myself sound like a better cook than I am. We were both trying to make a good impression." Despite everything, Zelda felt her lips twitch in what might have become a smile if she were not still shaking so hard. "Are you truly a terrible cook?" "The worst," he said, and there was warmth in his gray eyes now. "I can manage coffee and beans, and I can ruin anything more complicated than that with impressive efficiency." The absurdity of discussing cooking while she stood trembling in the street helped ground her somehow. She took another breath, this one slightly steadier than the last. Luther watched her carefully. "Would you permit me to help you?" "How?" The word came out plaintive, almost childlike. Instead of answering with words, he slowly extended his hand, palm up, leaving the choice entirely to her. Zelda stared at his hand for a long moment. It was tanned and calloused, marked by years of hard work, but the gesture itself was so gentle that it made her chest ache. She placed her trembling hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid, his grip firm but not tight. The simple human contact sent a shock through her system, but not the panicked kind she had been experiencing. This was different, grounding rather than frightening. "The shaking will pass," he said quietly. "It helped me once when I let someone hold my hand through the fear. Perhaps it will help you too." She wanted to ask what had frightened him, this calm man who seemed as immovable as the mountains in the distance, but she could not form the words. Instead, she just held onto his hand like a lifeline while her body continued its involuntary trembling. They stood there in the dusty street for what might have been 5 minutes or 20. Zelda had no sense of time passing. Luther did not try to talk her out of her fear or tell her to calm down. He simply held her hand and waited, his presence steady and unhurried. Gradually, so slowly she almost did not notice at first, the violent shaking began to ease. Her breath came a little easier. The tight panic in her chest loosened just slightly. "Better?" he asked after a while. "A little," she admitted. "I still feel shaky." "That is all right. Would you like to sit in the wagon? We can wait longer before heading to the ranch if you need more time." The thought of sitting down was appealing. Her legs felt like water. Luther helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hand steady at her elbow, then climbed up beside her. He did not immediately take up the reins, just sat there in companionable silence while the horses flicked their tails at flies, and the afternoon sun beat down on the weathered buildings of Dillon. "I should tell you," Luther said eventually, "that you have every right to change your mind. If you want to take the next stage back east, I will pay your fare and give you enough money to get settled somewhere. No hard feelings, no obligations." Zelda turned to look at him in surprise. "You would do that, of course." He met her eyes steadily. "I want a wife, but not one who feels trapped or afraid. That would not be fair to either of us. You agreed to come here based on letters and hopes, but the reality is different. You have the right to choose differently now that you have seen what that reality looks like." His honesty was unexpected and touching. In his letters, Luther had struck her as practical and somewhat formal, a man looking for a working partnership more than a romance. But there was kindness in him that the written word had not fully conveyed, a fundamental decency that made her want to try to be brave enough to stay. "I do not want to go back," she said slowly. "I have nothing to return to, but I am afraid I will disappoint you. I am not as strong as I pretended to be." "Strength comes in many forms," Luther said. "You have already shown more courage than you give yourself credit for. The shaking, the fear, those are not signs of weakness. They are honest reactions to a difficult situation." "I prefer honesty to false bravado." "What made you afraid?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You mentioned that someone held your hand through fear once." Luther was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I was 18, new to the war, the Battle of Cedar Creek. The noise and the chaos, it was more than my mind could process. I froze completely, could not move or think. An older soldier man named Samuel, he just grabbed my hand and held on while everything went to hell around us. Did not say much, just held on until I could function again. He died later that winter from disease. I think of him sometimes, how such a simple gesture made the difference between falling apart and finding my feet." The rawness in his voice told Zelda that he rarely spoke of this, that he was sharing something precious and painful. It made her own fear feel less shameful somehow, less isolating. "I am glad he was there for you," she said softly, "and I am glad I can be here for you now." Luther turned to look at her again. "So what do you say, Zelda Edwards? Would you like to see the ranch before you make your final decision?" "It is about an hour's ride from town. Nothing fancy, but it is home." Something in the way he said home made it sound like possibility rather than obligation. Zelda found herself nodding. "Yes, I would like to see it." "Good." Luther gathered the reins, then paused. "One more thing. We are supposed to get married tomorrow, according to our letters, but given how you are feeling, we can wait. Take whatever time you need to be sure. What will people think if we do not marry right away?" "I do not much care what people think," he said simply. "This is your life, not theirs. You should not start a marriage feeling pressured or afraid." The practical part of Zelda knew that delaying would only make things more difficult, would subject her to gossip and speculation. But the fact that Luther was willing to endure that for her sake meant more than she could easily express. "Thank you," she said, "for being kind, for being patient. I did not expect such understanding." "We are going to be building a life together if you choose to stay," Luther said. "That should start with respect and honesty, not performance and pretense." He clicked to the horses, and the wagon rolled forward, leaving Dillon behind. The landscape opened up around them, vast and beautiful and intimidating all at once. The road, such as it was, cut through grassland dotted with sage and the occasional cottonwood tree. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding patches of snow despite the summer heat. The sky seemed impossibly huge, a dome of blue unmarred by clouds. As they traveled, Luther pointed out landmarks and features of the land, his voice maintaining that same quiet steadiness that Zelda found increasingly reassuring. He showed her where the creek ran, where the best grazing land lay, where he had seen elk just last week. He spoke about the ranch with obvious affection, describing the cattle and horses, the work that needed doing, the rhythm of the seasons in this place. Zelda's shaking had subsided to occasional tremors now, her breathing almost normal. She found herself actually listening to what Luther was saying, taking in details about her potential new home rather than being consumed by panic. There was something deeply calming about his presence, about the way he seemed so comfortable in his own skin and in this landscape. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked. 6 years. Bought it with money I saved from working other ranches after the war. Started with almost nothing and built it up slowly. It is not the biggest spread in the territory, but it supports me well enough. With 2 people working it, we could do even better. And you have been alone all this time, mostly. I have a couple of hired men who come during roundup and branding, but day to day it is just me. It gets lonely sometimes, which is part of why I place the advertisement. But I will not lie to you, it is hard work and can be isolating. The nearest neighbor is 4 miles away. Town is an hour's ride. Winter can close us in for weeks at a time. He was not trying to sell her a dream, Zelda realized. He was telling her the plain truth, giving her the information she would need to make an honest choice. It made her trust him more, this refusal to paint pretty pictures over harsh reality. "I am used to hard work," she said. "The boarding house kept me busy from dawn until late at night. I can cook and sew and garden. I am good with figures too, helped keep the household accounts. What I am not used to is space. Philadelphia was crowded, always people and noise. This is so empty." "It feels that way at first," Luther agreed. "But you will come to know it. See how it is actually full of life once you learn to notice. Birds and animals, the way the grass changes with the seasons, the smell of rain coming across the plains. It becomes less empty and more alive the longer you are here." The way he described it made it sound almost beautiful rather than desolate. Zelda tried to see the landscape through his eyes, tried to imagine knowing it well enough to find it full rather than vacant. They crested a low hill, and Luther pulled the horses to a stop. "There," he said simply, pointing ahead. The ranch spread out below them in a shallow valley. A sturdy log house sat near a creek lined with cottonwoods, their leaves shimmering silver green in the breeze. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, including a barn that looked well maintained, a chicken coop, and what might have been a smokehouse. Cattle dotted the grassland beyond, peaceful and content. It was modest but clearly cared for, the work of someone who took pride in what he had built. "It is lovely," Zelda said, and meant it. The ranch had a solid, permanent quality that appealed to her after years of living in rented rooms in a boarding house that had never truly felt like home. "The house needs work inside," Luther warned. "Like I said, I am no hand at domestic comforts. But the structure is sound. I built it myself, made sure it would stand against anything the weather could throw at it, and the creek never runs dry, even in the hottest summers. Good water is worth more than gold out here." He drove the wagon down the slope toward the house. As they drew closer, Zelda could see details, the carved wooden shutters on the windows, the covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the building, the neat vegetable garden that had been planted near the kitchen door, though it looked somewhat neglected. Luther brought the wagon to a stop near the house and climbed down, then came around to help Zelda descend. Her legs were stiff from the journey, and she stumbled slightly. His hands caught her elbows, steadying her with easy strength. "Careful," he said. "Let yourself adjust for a moment." She stood there, his hands still lightly supporting her, and realized she was not shaking anymore. The trembling that had possessed her so completely in town had faded away almost without her noticing. Perhaps it was the quiet of this place, or the gentle competence of the man beside her, or simply exhaustion finally overtaking anxiety. Whatever the reason, she felt calmer than she had in weeks. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. "For everything. For being patient with me, for not making me feel foolish." "You have nothing to thank me for," Luther said. "And you are not foolish. You are adapting to something completely foreign to your experience. That takes time." He released her arms and picked up her carpet bag, then gestured toward the house. "Let me show you inside. You can take the bedroom, I will sleep in the spare room. No expectations, no pressure. Just see how you feel." The house was dim and cool after the brightness outside. The main room was large, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and simple furniture arranged for comfort rather than style. A table and chairs occupied the space near the kitchen area, which featured a good cast iron stove and open shelving for dishes and supplies. Everything was clean but sparse, clearly the domain of a man living alone. Luther led her down a short hallway to a bedroom. It held a bed frame with a corn husk mattress, a dresser, and a trunk. A window looked out over the creek and cottonwoods. The room smelled faintly of cedar and fresh air. "It is not much," Luther said, setting her bag on the trunk. "But you can arrange it however you like. Make it your own space." Zelda walked to the window and looked out at the view. The sound of the creek was audible even through the glass, a gentle, constant music. The afternoon sun filtered through the cottonwood leaves, making patterns of light and shadow. "It is peaceful," she said. "I think I could sleep well here." "I hope so. You must be exhausted from the journey. Why do not you rest for a while? I will make us some supper, such as it will be, and we can eat later when you are ready." The thought of lying down was almost irresistible. Zelda had been traveling for days, sleeping fitfully on trains and the stagecoach, never fully relaxing. The bed looked wonderfully inviting. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I should help with supper." "You will have plenty of time to help with meals going forward if you decide to stay," Luther said. "For today, just rest. Let yourself settle in." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Zelda stood by the window for a moment longer, then removed her traveling jacket and shoes. The dress she wore was her best one, carefully mended and pressed before she left Philadelphia, but it was dusty and wrinkled now from the journey. She would need to do laundry soon, would need to establish routines and rhythms in this new life. But for now, she lay down on the bed, sinking into the mattress with a sigh of relief. The pillow smelled clean, like sun-dried cotton. Through the window, she could see clouds beginning to build over the mountains, promising rain later perhaps. The sound of the creek lulled her, and almost before she realized it, she had fallen into deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke, the light outside had shifted to the golden tones of early evening. For a moment, Zelda felt disoriented, not sure where she was or how she had gotten there. Then memory returned, the journey, the fear in town, Luther's patient kindness. She sat up slowly, feeling more rested than she had in weeks despite having slept in her clothes. Voices drifted from the main room, low and conversational. Zelda smoothed her hair as best she could and went to investigate, curious who might be visiting. Luther stood at the stove with another man, both of them working on what appeared to be supper preparations. The visitor was older, perhaps in his 40s, with graying hair and a weathered face that bore the marks of a hard life. He looked up when Zelda entered, his expression friendly and curious. "Ah, you are awake," Luther said, turning from the stove. "I hope we did not disturb you. This is my neighbor, Marcus Whitfield. He stopped by to meet you and very kindly offered to help make supper since he knows my limitations in the kitchen." Marcus wiped his hands on a towel and nodded respectfully to Zelda. "Miss Edwards, pleasure to make your acquaintance. Welcome to the territory." "Thank you," Zelda said, still feeling slightly muzzy from sleep. "I apologize for my appearance. I did not mean to nap so long." "No apology needed," Marcus said warmly. "That is a brutal journey from the east. You are entitled to rest. Luther told me you arrived today. I wanted to stop by and introduce myself and maybe save you from his cooking on your first night." Despite herself, Zelda smiled. "He warned me about his cooking." "With good reason," Marcus said with a laugh. "The man can work cattle and build anything you need, but put him in front of a stove and disaster follows. My wife Sarah wanted to come too, but she is not feeling well today. She is eager to meet you, though, and asked me to invite you to supper at our place tomorrow if you are up for it." The casual friendliness was unexpected and welcome. Zelda had worried about isolation, but Marcus made it seem like there was a community here, people who looked after each other despite the distances between homesteads. "I would like that very much," she said. "Thank you. Excellent. Now, we have got venison steaks and potatoes cooking, and I threw together some biscuits. Should be ready shortly. Luther, why do not you show Miss Edwards where to wash up, and we will eat in a few minutes?" Luther led Zelda to the wash basin near the back door, where a bucket of fresh water waited along with soap and clean towels. The simple act of washing her face and hands helped her feel more present and alert. When she returned to the main room, the table had been set with plain dishes, and the food smelled surprisingly good. The meal was comfortable and unhurried. Marcus kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling stories about the territory and the characters who lived here, making both Zelda and Luther laugh with his descriptions of various mishaps and adventures. He asked Zelda about Philadelphia with genuine interest, seeming fascinated by her descriptions of city life. "Cannot imagine living that close to so many people," Marcus said, shaking his head. "I get nervous when I have to spend more than a day in town. Give me open range any time." "I felt the opposite when I arrived," Zelda admitted. "The emptiness frightened me. I could not stop shaking." She glanced at Luther as she said it, wondering if he would be embarrassed by her admission, but he met her eyes with that same steady calm. "It is a big adjustment," Marcus agreed. "My Sarah, when she first came here, she cried for a week straight. Thought I had brought her to the end of the earth. Now she says she could never go back east, loves it here too much. Give it time. The land grows on you." After supper, Marcus took his leave with promises to see them both the next day. Luther walked him out, and Zelda began clearing the dishes, grateful to have something useful to do. When Luther returned, he found her at the wash basin, sleeves rolled up and hands in soapy water. "You do not have to do that tonight," he said. "You should rest more." "I feel better when I am being useful," Zelda replied, "and I slept for hours already. Let me do this small thing." Luther picked up a towel and began drying the dishes she washed, the two of them working side by side in companionable silence. It felt domestic and peaceful, a glimpse of what their life together might be like if she chose to stay. "Marcus seems very kind," Zelda said after a while. "He is. He and Sarah have been good neighbors, helped me when I first started the ranch. They have 4 children, all wild as March hares but good kids. You will meet them tomorrow if you go for supper. You will come too, will you not? If you want me to, Luther said. But if you would prefer to visit on your own, I will understand. Might be easier to talk freely without me there. The thought of going alone made Zelda's anxiety spike slightly. I would like you to come, she said firmly. If that is all right, of course. We will go together. They finished the dishes and tidied the kitchen. Full darkness had fallen outside, the vast Montana night pressing against the windows. Without the ambient light of city streets and buildings, the darkness here was absolute, except for the stars that blazed overhead with an intensity Zelda had never witnessed before. I should show you the lanterns and candles, Luther said, and where everything is in case you need anything in the night. He gave her a thorough tour of the house's practical details, showing her where he kept matches and lamp oil, where the privy was located outside, how to work the locks on the doors and windows. His explanations were patient and detailed, treating her like an intelligent adult rather than a helpless woman who needed coddling. I will be in the room at the end of the hall, he said finally. If you need anything at all, do not hesitate to wake me. I am a light sleeper. They stood in the hallway between their two doors, and for a moment the awareness of being alone together, unmarried in this house, hung between them. Luther seemed to sense her sudden nervousness because he stepped back slightly, giving her more space. You are completely safe, he said quietly. I give you my word as a gentleman, nothing will happen that you do not clearly want and invite. The formality of his statement should have been stiff or awkward, but instead it was reassuring. Zelda nodded, finding her voice. I know. I trust you. You have shown me nothing but respect and kindness all day. Sleep well, Zelda. Tomorrow is a new day, and perhaps things will feel clearer in the morning. Good night, Luther. She went into her room and closed the door, then stood leaning against it for a moment, processing everything that had happened. This morning, she had been on a stagecoach approaching an unknown town, terrified and shaking. Now she was in a ranch house in Montana, feeling cautiously hopeful about a future she had not even been sure she would survive to see. The bed welcomed her again, and this time she changed into her nightgown before sliding under the quilt. The sheets smelled of fresh air and lavender. Someone had made an effort to make the room welcoming. Luther, she assumed, preparing for her arrival with more care than she would have expected. She lay in the darkness listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this new place. The creek murmuring outside, the wind in the cottonwoods, the distant call of some night bird. Instead of frightening her, the sounds were soothing, a lullaby from the land itself. Her last thought before sleep took her was that perhaps, just perhaps, she might find a home here after all. Morning came with sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of activity from elsewhere in the house. Zelda dressed in one of her simpler work dresses, braided her dark hair, and ventured out to find Luther already up and dressed, working at the stove. Good morning, he said when he saw her. I hope you slept well. Coffee is ready and I am attempting eggs. Fair warning, they may not be entirely successful. Let me help, Zelda said, moving to join him at the stove. Cooking was a large part of my duties at the boarding house. I can teach you if you would like. I would like that very much, Luther said, stepping aside to give her room. I have been on my own so long that I have fallen into bad habits. Having someone to learn from would be welcome. They worked together to salvage his eggs and make fresh biscuits, Zelda explaining techniques and Luther listening attentively, asking good questions. It was comfortable and easy, and Zelda found herself relaxing more with each passing minute. When they sat down to eat, the food was simple but good, and the conversation flowed naturally. I have been thinking, Luther said as they finished breakfast. Today, before we go to the Whitfields for supper, I could show you around the ranch properly. Introduce you to the animals, show you where everything is, help you get your bearings. What do you think? I would like that, Zelda said. I want to understand what life here would really be like. Good. Let me finish the morning chores first, feeding and checking the stock. You can come with me if you want, or you can settle in here more. Either way is fine. I will come with you, Zelda decided. No point in delaying. I want to see what the work involves. Luther smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. All right then. Fair warning, it is going to involve dust and manure and probably getting your dress dirty. Ranch work is not genteel. I did not come here expecting genteel, Zelda said with more confidence than she felt. I came here expecting real life, and real life is messy. They went out together into the bright morning. The air was cool and fresh, the sky that impossible blue that seemed unique to this place. Luther showed her the chickens first, a flock of practical brown hens that needed feeding and watering. Zelda scattered grain while Luther collected eggs, both of them working with the easy rhythm of routine tasks. Next came the horses, 4 of them in a paddock near the barn. Luther introduced each one by name and personality, clearly fond of the animals. He showed Zelda how to check their feet for stones, how to brush their coats, how to read their body language for signs of illness or distress. Horses are essential out here, he explained. They are not just transportation, they are partners. Treat them well, and they will carry you through anything. The cattle were scattered across the grassland, and Luther took Zelda on a walking tour of the property, pointing out fence lines and water sources, explaining his rotation system for grazing and his plans for the coming seasons. He spoke about the work with passion and knowledge, clearly someone who had found his calling in this life. As they walked, Zelda felt herself opening to the landscape in a way she had not been able to the day before. The fear that had gripped her so completely in town had dissipated, replaced by curiosity and cautious interest. The land was harsh but beautiful, and Luther moved through it with such confidence that she began to believe she might learn to do the same. They paused at the top of a low rise where they could see the whole ranch spread below them, the house and buildings looking small and sturdy against the vastness of grassland and sky. It is not Philadelphia, Luther said quietly. It will never be easy or comfortable in the way city life can be. But it is honest work and good land, and a life that means something. At least, it means something to me. Zelda turned to look at him, this man she barely knew who had shown her such patience and respect. His face was serious again, and she could see vulnerability there, the fear that she would reject what he was offering. I can see why you love it, she said honestly. It frightened me at first, but I am beginning to understand. There is a kind of freedom here, is there not? Space to become whoever you choose to be. Yes, Luther said, relief evident in his voice. Exactly that. The past does not matter as much out here. What matters is what you make of the present. They stood together in the sunshine, and Zelda felt something shift inside her. The future still felt uncertain and daunting, but it also felt possible in a way it had not before. She was not sure yet if she could build a life here, but she was willing to try, and that was more than she had thought possible when she stepped off the stagecoach yesterday. Shall we head back? Luther asked. We should clean up before going to the Whitfields later. They walked back to the house side by side, and as they went, Zelda realized she was no longer counting the distance to town or calculating how long it would take to reach safety if she changed her mind. Instead, she was noticing the wildflowers growing among the grasses, the way the light played across the mountains, the particular shade of green the cottonwoods turned when the wind moved through them. Perhaps she was already beginning to see the land the way Luther did, full rather than empty, alive rather than desolate. They spent the afternoon in quiet domestic tasks. Zelda unpacked her few belongings and arranged them in the bedroom, making the space feel more like her own. She mended a tear in Luther's shirt that he had been ignoring and showed him how to properly fold clothes so they would not wrinkle as badly. He split firewood and brought in water and fixed a squeaky hinge on one of the kitchen cabinets that had been annoying him for months. Working together felt natural, as though they were finding a rhythm that suited them both. Zelda found herself watching Luther when he was not looking, noticing the way he moved with economical grace, the care he took with even small tasks. He was not a man who did things halfway or carelessly. Everything received his full attention and best effort. When it was time to leave for the Whitfields, Luther hitched up the wagon again and helped Zelda up onto the seat. She had changed into her better dress and tidied her hair, wanting to make a good impression on Sarah Whitfield. The neighboring ranch was similar to Luther's but larger, with a sprawling house that showed signs of recent additions built on to accommodate a growing family. Children's voices rang out as they approached, and before Luther had even stopped the wagon, 3 young ones came racing toward them with a gangly dog barking joyously in pursuit. "Uncle Luther," the smallest one shouted, a girl of perhaps 6 with wild blonde curls. "You came." "Papa said you were bringing a lady." "Manners, Emma," a woman's voice called from the porch. "Let them climb down before you mob them." Sarah Whitfield appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a sturdy woman with kind eyes and graying brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. Despite Marcus saying she was not feeling well, she looked robust and cheerful. "Miss Edwards, welcome," Sarah said warmly. "Please forgive the chaos. We are not used to having visitors and the children are excited." "The chaos is lovely," Zelda said honestly, climbing down from the wagon with Luther's help. "It has been a long time since I was around children." The introductions were made in a flurry of names and faces. Emma was the youngest at 6. Then came twin boys, Thomas and James, who were 9 and nearly identical except for a scar on Thomas's chin. The oldest, Ruth, was 14 and stood slightly apart with the self-conscious dignity of someone not quite child and not quite adult. Come in," Sarah said, herding everyone toward the house. "Supper is nearly ready. Marcus is just washing up. Ruth, help me set the table. Boys, take the dog outside before he trips someone." The house was loud and warm and full of life. The main room was cluttered with signs of the family's daily existence, books and toys and half-finished projects scattered on every surface. It should have been chaotic, but instead it felt lived in and loved, a real home rather than just a structure. Supper was a boisterous affair, with multiple conversations happening simultaneously, children interrupting and being gently corrected, laughter and teasing flowing freely. Zelda found herself relaxing completely for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, drawn into the family's warmth and easy affection. Sarah asked her questions about her journey and her first impressions of Montana, but not in a prying way. She seemed genuinely interested in Zelda's experiences, nodding sympathetically when Zelda admitted to being frightened at first. "I was terrified," Sarah confessed. "When Marcus brought me here 15 years ago, I thought he had lost his mind. It was so different from Ohio, where I grew up. But the land gets into your blood somehow. Now I cannot imagine living anywhere else." "How long did it take?" Zelda asked. "To feel at home, I mean." Sarah considered. "About a year, maybe. The first winter was hard, I will not lie. But spring came, and everything turned green and wild, and I felt like I was seeing real beauty for the first time. After that, it got easier every season." "You will do fine," Marcus added. "You have got Luther to help you learn, and he is one of the most capable men I know." and we are just 4 miles away if you need anything. Neighbors look after each other out here. You are not as isolated as it seems." After supper, the women sat on the porch while the men took the children to do evening chores. The sun was setting in spectacular fashion, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and deep rose. Sarah poured them both coffee and settled into her rocking chair with a contented sigh. "So," she said without preamble, "how are you really doing?" "Marcus said Luther mentioned you were quite shaken when you arrived." Zelda appreciated the directness. "I was worse than shaken, actually. I could not stop trembling, could barely breathe. It was humiliating." "Nothing humiliating about honest fear," Sarah said firmly. "You left everything familiar and traveled across the country to marry a stranger. That takes enormous courage even if you do not feel courageous." "Luther was very kind about it," Zelda said softly. "He held my hand until the shaking passed. Offered to send me back east with no hard feelings if I wanted to leave." Sarah smiled. "That sounds like Luther. He is a good man, quiet and steady. Lost his whole family during the war, his parents and younger sister. I think that is part of why he values peace and security so much now. He has known real loss." Zelda felt a pang of sadness for Luther's suffering, but it also explained something about his patience and understanding. He knew what it was to be afraid and alone. "Have you made your decision?" Sarah asked. "About staying, I mean." "I think so," Zelda said slowly. "I want to try. I cannot promise I will manage it all perfectly, but I want to try to build a life here." "That is all any of us can do," Sarah said. "Try our best and help each other through the hard parts." "And speaking practically, you should know that there are 3 other families within 10 miles, and we get together for church services once a month, more often in good weather. There is a circuit preacher who comes through every few months. You will not be completely cut off from society." They talked until the stars came out. Sarah sharing practical advice about everything from preserving food for winter to dealing with the isolation when storms closed the roads. By the time Luther came to collect Zelda for the ride home, she felt like she had made a genuine friend, someone who would help her navigate this new life. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them tired from the long day. The moon had risen, nearly full, turning the landscape silver and strange. "Thank you for today," Zelda said as they neared the house. "For showing me the ranch, for taking me to meet the Whitfields. It helped more than I can say." "They are good people," Luther agreed. "I am glad you and Sarah got along. She can tell you things about living here that I would not think to mention." He helped her down from the wagon and tended to the horses while Zelda went inside and lit the lamps. When he came in, she had made tea and set out cups at the table. They sat together in the warm lamplight, the house quiet around them. "I have made a decision," Zelda said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I would like to stay. I would like to marry you as we planned." Luther looked at her carefully. "You are sure? No more shaking, no more fear?" "Oh, I am still afraid," Zelda admitted. "But it is a manageable fear now, not the overwhelming panic from yesterday. I think this could be a good life, and I think we could be good partners. If you still want me." "I do," Luther said simply. "I want you to stay very much. But I also want you to know that the marriage does not have to be, well, traditional right away. We can take our time getting to know each other. No expectations or demands." Zelda felt her cheeks warm but met his eyes. "That is very considerate. I think that would be wise. We barely know each other, really. Perhaps we can court a little, even though the order is backwards." Luther smiled. "I would like that. Court my own wife, what a novel idea." They talked until late, making plans for the wedding in 2 days when the circuit preacher would be in Dillon. It would be simple, just the necessary words and witnesses, but real and binding. They discussed the practical arrangements of their life together, how they would divide the work and share responsibilities. It was not the most romantic conversation, but it felt honest and right. When they finally went to their separate rooms, Zelda felt peaceful rather than anxious. She had made her choice with open eyes, understanding both the challenges and possibilities ahead. Whatever came next, she would face it alongside Luther, and that felt like enough. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of activity. Zelda cleaned the house thoroughly, wanting it to feel fresh and welcoming. She made curtains for the windows from fabric Luther had stored away, transforming the plain rooms into something more homelike. She cooked meals, practiced on the kitchen garden, and learned more about the animals and their care. Luther worked alongside her when he could, continuing to teach her about ranch life. He showed her how to shoot his rifle, insisting she needed to know how to protect herself and deal with predators. Zelda had never held a gun before, but Luther was patient, showing her how to position her body, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger rather than pulling it. "You are a natural," he said after her 5th shot hit near the target. "Better than I was when I started." They talked constantly, sharing stories about their pasts and their hopes for the future. Zelda learned that Luther had wanted to be a teacher before the war, that he loved reading and could recite poetry from memory. He learned that Zelda had taught herself mathematics from books, that she dreamed of having a garden full of flowers as well as vegetables, that she sang when she worked though she was shy about it. With each conversation, Zelda felt the connection between them deepening, moving beyond the practical arrangement they had started with into something that felt like genuine friendship and the beginning of affection. The morning of their wedding day dawned clear and bright. Zelda dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that Sarah had helped her alter to fit better. Sarah had also lent her a beautiful shawl and helped arrange her hair in a style that was both practical and pretty. "You look lovely," Sarah said, putting the final pins in place. "Luther is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Zelda said. "A week ago I was terrified and shaking. Now I am about to marry a good man and start a new life. It seems almost too good to be true." "It is real," Sarah assured her, "and it is going to be wonderful, hard sometimes, but wonderful." The ceremony took place in the small church in Dillon, with Marcus and Sarah serving as witnesses. The preacher, an elderly man with kind eyes, kept the service short and simple. Luther stood beside Zelda, dressed in his best clothes, his gray eyes steady and reassuring as they spoke their vows. When the preacher pronounced them married, Luther took Zelda's hand gently and kissed her cheek with careful respect. It was chaste and proper, but the touch sent warmth through her. They were husband and wife now, bound together for whatever came next. The Whitfields hosted a small celebration dinner, and a few other neighbors came to offer congratulations and welcome Zelda to the community. Everyone was friendly and warm, and Zelda began to understand that while the ranches were spread far apart, there was a real sense of community among the people who chose to live in this harsh and beautiful place. By late afternoon, Luther and Zelda returned to their ranch, to their home. The word felt right in Zelda's mind now. Home. Not the boarding house in Philadelphia that had never quite been hers, but this place that she was building with Luther, day by day and choice by choice. That night, they sat on the porch together watching the sunset paint the sky. Luther had moved a second chair out so they could sit side by side, and their hands rested close together on the armrest between them. "Are you happy?" Luther asked quietly. Zelda considered the question honestly. "I am hopeful," she said, "and I am grateful. And I think happy is coming if it is not quite here yet." "That is enough," Luther said. "That is more than enough." He reached over and laced his fingers through hers, and they sat together in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, bright and endless in the vast Montana sky. The weeks that followed established the rhythm of their new life together. They woke early and worked hard, dividing the ranch chores between them based on ability and preference. Zelda took over the kitchen entirely, relieved to find she actually enjoyed cooking when she had good ingredients and someone who appreciated her efforts. She expanded the garden, started making cheese and butter, and began preserving food for the winter ahead. Luther handled most of the heavy physical labor with the cattle and horses, but he taught Zelda to ride so she could help with herding when needed. She was nervous at first, but the horse he chose for her was gentle and patient, and gradually she gained confidence. There was freedom in riding across the grassland, wind in her hair and vast sky overhead that she had never experienced in her old life. They talked constantly, sharing ideas and making decisions together. Luther valued Zelda's opinion and sought her input on everything from which cattle to sell to whether they should try raising pigs. She appreciated being treated as a full partner rather than just a helper or decoration. In the evenings, they sat together reading or working on small projects. Luther carved new handles for tools while Zelda sewed or mended. Sometimes Luther would read aloud, his voice bringing life to poetry and novels. Sometimes Zelda would sing while she worked, her voice growing stronger as she became less self-conscious. Sometimes they just talked, learning each other's thoughts and dreams. The physical side of their marriage developed slowly, both of them taking their time. Luther never pushed or demanded, and Zelda appreciated his patience as she learned to trust him with more than just her practical daily life. He was gentle and respectful, always making sure she was comfortable and willing. Gradually, affection deepened into something warmer, more intimate, and Zelda found herself falling in love with her quiet, steady husband. She loved how capable he was, how nothing seemed to rattle him. She loved his kindness to animals and his generosity to neighbors. She loved the way he looked at her, as though she was something precious and worthy of protection. She loved his hands, scarred and calloused from hard work, but always gentle when they touched her. Luther seemed to be falling in love with her too, though he was slower to put it into words. She saw it in the way he brought her wildflowers he found on the range, in how he made sure her favorite coffee was always stocked, in the way he would stop what he was doing just to watch her work, a soft smile on his usually serious face. Summer gave way to autumn, and the work changed with the seasons. They prepared the ranch for winter, making sure outbuildings were secure and supplies were laid in. Luther hired his seasonal workers for the fall roundup, and Zelda learned to cook for a crew, feeding hungry men who worked dawn to dusk gathering and sorting cattle. The hired men were respectful and friendly, having been warned by Luther to mind their manners. They seemed amazed that Luther had managed to find a wife, and more amazed that she was actually willing to work alongside them when needed. Zelda found she enjoyed the bustle and company, the satisfaction of hard work done well. When the crew left, and it was just the two of them again, the ranch felt very quiet. They settled into their winter routine as the weather turned cold and snow began to fall. The isolation that Zelda had feared at first no longer bothered her. She and Luther had become a complete unit, comfortable in each other's company and rhythms. One evening in late November, they sat by the fire after supper, Zelda mending socks and Luther sharpening his knife. Snow fell outside, visible in the lamplight from the window, but the house was warm and cozy. "Zelda," Luther said suddenly, setting down his knife, "I need to tell you something." She looked up, hearing the seriousness in his voice. "What is it?" "I love you." The words came out blunt and unadorned. "I did not expect to when you arrived. I thought we would have a practical partnership, maybe friendship, but you have become everything to me. I love you, and I needed you to know." Zelda set down her mending, her heart swelling with joy. "I love you too," she said. "I have been wanting to say it for weeks but was not sure if it was too soon." Luther crossed to her and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Not too soon. Exactly the right time. He kissed her then, not the careful, respectful kisses they had shared before, but something deeper and more passionate. Zelda responded with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Come to bed with me," Zelda whispered. "Truly, completely. I want you. I want us to be fully married in every way." Luther stood and pulled her up with him, then swept her into his arms and carried her down the hall to the bedroom they still had not shared, the one that had been his alone. He laid her on the bed gently and followed her down, and they spent the night learning each other in ways they had not yet explored, expressing their love through touch and whispered words. Afterward, lying wrapped in his arms, Zelda felt completely at peace. This was home, truly and finally. Not a place, but this man, this partnership, this love they had built from uncertainty and fear into something solid and beautiful. Winter deepened and they were snowed in for weeks at a time, but it never felt like hardship. They had each other, and that was enough. Luther taught Zelda to play chess, and she taught him to bake bread that did not turn out like rocks. They read books aloud, discussed philosophy and politics, made love and made plans for the spring. When winter finally broke and the world turned green again, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She told Luther one morning over breakfast, nervous about his reaction despite knowing he wanted children. His face lit up with pure joy. "Truly, you are sure?" "As sure as I can be," Zelda said. "Sarah thinks I am about 3 months along. The baby should come in late summer." Luther came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he said against her hair. "A year ago I was alone. Now I have you and soon we will have a child. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Zelda said, leaning into his strength. "When I stepped off that stagecoach shaking with fear, I never imagined I would end up this happy." "You are not shaking now," Luther observed. "No," Zelda agreed. "I have not shaken with fear since that first day, since you held me until I felt safe. You still make me feel safe, every single day." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Luther was attentive without being overbearing. He took over the heavier chores but still let Zelda do the work she enjoyed. Sarah visited regularly to check on her and offer advice, and the two women's friendship deepened. In late August, on a hot afternoon, Zelda went into labor. Luther rode for Sarah, who arrived quickly with her medical supplies and calm competence. Luther stayed with Zelda through the whole ordeal, holding her hand and wiping her face with cool cloths, never flinching from the difficulty of it. Their son was born just after midnight, a healthy baby with a shock of dark hair and strong lungs that announced his presence to the world. Luther held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Zelda, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel after the soldier who had helped Luther through his fear so many years ago. It felt right to honor that legacy of compassion and courage. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved the ranch and the animals. 2 years after him came a daughter they named Grace, who inherited her mother's dark eyes and her father's steady temperament. The house that had been so quiet and empty when Zelda first arrived was now filled with children's laughter and the organized chaos of family life. Luther expanded the ranch gradually, building their herd and their prosperity. Zelda managed the household and started raising chickens and geese for market, adding to their income. They made improvements to the house, adding rooms and comforts as they could afford them. The community around them grew as well. More families settled in the valley, and soon there was enough population for a proper school. Zelda helped establish it, serving on the school board and occasionally teaching when the regular teacher was unavailable. Luther became known as a fair and honest rancher, someone neighbors could count on for help or advice. They weathered hard times together, drought years and harsh winters and the occasional loss of stock to disease or predators. But nothing broke them, nothing drove them apart. They had built their foundation on honesty and respect and genuine love, and it held firm through everything life threw at them. On their 10th anniversary, Luther took Zelda riding up to the hill where he had first shown her the ranch, where she had begun to see possibility instead of just emptiness. They sat on their horses looking down at the home they had built together, now weathered and comfortable, with smoke rising from the chimney and their children playing in the yard under the watchful eye of Sarah's oldest daughter, who helped with childcare for money for school clothes. "Do you ever regret it?" Luther asked. "Answering my advertisement, coming here, building this life?" Zelda turned to look at him, this man she loved more with each passing year. Gray was starting to appear in his dark hair, and lines had deepened around his eyes from squinting into the sun, but he was still the steady, patient man who had held her hand through her fear that first day. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I am meant to be." "I was so nervous when I went to meet you in town," Luther admitted. "Afraid you would take one look at me or this place and run back east. When you started shaking, I thought that was it. I had lost my chance before I even had it." "But you did not push," Zelda said. "You did not demand or pressure. You just offered safety and patience and let me find my courage. That is why it worked, because you gave me the space to make my own choice." "Best choice I ever made," Luther said, placing that advertisement. "Second best was hiring hands that day so I could hold you until you felt safe." They rode back down to the house together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Their children ran to meet them, Samuel now 10 and Grace 8, both of them sun-browned and happy. The dog barked joyfully, and inside the house, supper waited, filling the air with savory smells. That night, after the children were tucked into bed, Luther and Zelda sat on their porch as they had so many evenings before. The stars blazed overhead, bright and beautiful, and the crickets sang in the grass. Zelda leaned her head on Luther's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "I love you," he said quietly. "I love you too," she replied. "Always and forever." The ranch continued to thrive as the years passed. Samuel grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's steady temperament and his mother's quick mind. He learned every aspect of ranch work from Luther, but he also attended school regularly, encouraged by both parents to pursue education along with practical skills. Grace proved to have a talent with horses that surprised everyone, able to gentle the most skittish colt with patience and soft words. When Samuel was 16, a young girl and her family arrived from the east, much as Zelda had years before. The girl, nervous and overwhelmed, reminded Zelda so much of herself that it made her heart ache. She took the girl under her wing, offering friendship and advice, helping her adjust to frontier life. Watching Samuel notice the girl with shy interest made Zelda smile, remembering her own beginning with Luther. Grace, at 14, declared she wanted to become a veterinarian, an ambition that would have been impossible for a girl in earlier times but was slowly becoming achievable. Luther and Zelda encouraged her dreams, even as they knew it would mean sending her away for education eventually. The ranch had become one of the most successful in the territory, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Luther was offered positions of leadership in the territorial government several times, but always declined, preferring his quiet life with his family to politics and public life. Zelda had become a pillar of the community, serving on committees, organizing social events, and mentoring new arrivals. She had transformed from the frightened young woman shaking on a street in Dillon to a confident, capable frontier matriarch. But she never forgot those early days, never forgot the fear and uncertainty or the quiet man who had offered his hand and his patience. On their 20th anniversary, the community threw them a celebration. Nearly 100 people came, families from all over the valley who considered Luther and Zelda friends and role models. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and speeches thanking them for their contributions to the community. When Luther was called on to speak, he stood with Zelda beside him, his hand finding hers automatically as it always did. 20 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, I placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride. I was looking for a working partnership, someone practical and capable. What I got was so much more than I could have imagined. Zelda brought life and love to my home. She transformed a house into a home, a ranch into a legacy, and my solitary existence into something rich and full. The best decision I ever made was offering her my hand that first day when she was shaking with fear. Thank you all for celebrating this life we have built together. There was not a dry eye in the crowd, including Zelda's. Luther pulled her close and kissed her in front of everyone, and the gathering erupted in cheers and applause. As the celebration continued around them, Zelda thought back over the years. She remembered stepping off that stagecoach, terrified and uncertain. She remembered Luther's gray eyes, calm and patient, offering steadiness when she had none. She remembered the slow building of trust and affection into deep, abiding love. She remembered each milestone, each challenge overcome, each joy shared. Samuel approached with a young woman on his arm, the girl from the east who had reminded Zelda of herself. Mother, Samuel said formally, I would like your blessing. I have asked Margaret to marry me, and she has accepted. Luther and Zelda looked at each other and smiled, seeing history come full circle. They gave their blessing gladly, welcoming Margaret into the family with open hearts. Life continued its cycles. Samuel and Margaret were married and built their own home on the far section of the ranch. Grace went east for her education, returning 3 years later with a degree and a passion for veterinary medicine that she put to use throughout the territory. She eventually married a fellow veterinarian, and they established a practice that served ranchers for hundreds of miles around. Grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with new life and laughter. Luther taught them to ride and care for the land as he had taught his own children. Zelda taught them to read and figure and see the beauty in the harsh landscape. Together, they passed on the values and knowledge that had sustained them through decades of frontier life. As they grew older, Luther and Zelda gradually stepped back from the daily ranch work, letting Samuel and Margaret take over management while they enjoyed a slower pace. They spent their days in each other's company, still devoted after so many years, still finding joy in simple moments together. On a warm evening in their 45th year of marriage, they sat on the porch they had rebuilt twice and improved many times. Luther was 73 now, Zelda 67, their bodies marked by hard work and long years, but their minds still sharp and their love still strong. You remember the first time we sat here together? Luther asked, his voice a bit thinner than it once had been, but still the same steady tone that had reassured her so many years ago. After our wedding day, Zelda said, reaching for his hand. You moved a second chair out so we could sit together. We watched the sunset and held hands, and I felt hopeful for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. 45 years, Luther said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like we have always been together. Both are true, Zelda said. We have built a lifetime, but the core of it, the love and partnership, that has been constant since the beginning. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in colors they had watched together thousands of times. Their grandchildren's voices drifted from the main house where the family had gathered for supper. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and enduring, a testament to what they had built from fear and hope and relentless hard work. "I love you, Zelda Foster," Luther said. "You took my hand when you were shaking with fear, and you never let go. You made my life worth living." "And I love you, Luther Foster," Zelda replied. "You held me until I felt safe, and you have been my safety and my home ever since. Everything good in my life started the day you offered me your hand and your patience." They sat together as the stars came out, as they had done so many times before, and would do as many times as they were granted. Two people who had started as strangers brought together by practical necessity, who had built something extraordinary through choice and commitment and love. The ranch would continue beyond them, passed to children and grandchildren who would carry on the legacy. But the true legacy was not the land or the cattle, or even the prosperity. The true legacy was the example of what two people could build when they chose partnership over convenience, patience over pressure, and love over everything else. As full darkness fell and the air grew cool, Luther helped Zelda to her feet and they went inside together, still hand in hand, to join their family for supper. The house was full of voices and laughter, warmth and life, everything that had been missing when Luther lived there alone before Zelda arrived. She had come to Montana territory shaking with fear, barely able to function, certain she had made a terrible mistake. He had offered his hand and his steady calm, asking nothing but giving everything. Together, they had built not just a ranch or a family, but a love story that would be remembered and retold for generations. An example of what was possible when two people truly committed to building something beautiful together. Years later, when their great-grandchildren asked about the early days, about how Luther and Zelda had met and built their life, the story was always told the same way. The mail-order bride who could not stop shaking with fear. The calm rancher who held her until she felt safe. The hand offered in patience, and the choice made in hope, that had led to everything that came after. It was a story about courage found not in the absence of fear, but in the willingness to accept help and try anyway. About love built not on passion or convenience, but on respect and partnership and steady commitment through good times and hard. About home being not a place, but the person whose hand you hold through whatever life brings. And it was a story with the happiest of endings, because Luther and Zelda Foster lived their long lives surrounded by love, supported by community, and secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other exactly what they needed. From fear and uncertainty, they had built something lasting and beautiful, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. When Luther passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Zelda mourned deeply but not despairingly. They had been granted more years together than many couples received, years filled with richness and meaning. She lived for more years after him, surrounded by family, still sharp and engaged with the world until the end. When she died at 72, the whole territory mourned a woman who had become legendary for her strength, wisdom, and kindness. But those who knew her best remembered most how she had arrived, shaking and afraid, and how the right man's patience and steadiness had helped her become everything she was capable of being. They were buried together on the hill overlooking the ranch, where they had so often ridden together in life. Their gravestone was simple, bearing their names and dates and one line that Samuel insisted on, that captured everything essential about their story. She came afraid. He offered safety. Together they built love. The ranch continued under Samuel and his children, then his children's children. The original house was preserved as the family's history, while new buildings grew up around it. But the story of Luther and Zelda was never forgotten, told and retold at family gatherings and community celebrations, an inspiration to anyone facing fear or uncertainty about the future. Because sometimes the bravest thing is to accept help when you need it. Sometimes safety comes in the form of a steady hand offered without demands. And sometimes the greatest love stories start not with passion but with patience, not with certainty but with hope, not with strength but with the willingness to be vulnerable enough to let someone help you find your strength. Luther and Zelda's story was all of that and more. It was proof that from the shakiest of beginnings could grow the strongest of foundations. That fear could transform into courage, strangers into soulmates, and a desperate gamble into a legacy of love that lasted far beyond one lifetime. Their story became part of the land itself, as enduring as the mountains and as constant as the creek that still ran past the house they had shared. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we are most afraid, when we reach out despite our fear, and find that the hand reaching back offers not just safety, but the possibility of everything we never knew we needed. And that is how a mail-order bride who could not stop shaking with fear and the calm rancher who held her, until she felt safe, built a love that lasted forever. A story that would be told as long as there were people who believed in the power of patience, the strength of gentleness, and the transformative nature of love freely given and gratefully received.